to our final discussion of Federalist Papers.
Sponsored by Diet Mountain.
This is our eighth session, and we're looking at
expecting a free case from PepsiCo.
100 College Drive, Kankakee, Illinois 60901.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I'm available to be a spokesperson. Got a grueling set of Federalist Papers ahead of you? Try Diet Mountain.
Save it for the bloopers, Mr. DePasquale.
Patrick will edit this out, won't you?
Yeah.
All right, take two.
So we're here to discuss the 77 through 85, and this dealt with the judiciary, and then the last two just with some kind of wrap-up. Odds and ends, things that weren't addressed, things that were going to be addressed originally, and then realized that addressed them along the way. So let's start off with just talking about the judiciary. This is obviously one of the biggest topics of today. The Supreme Court appointments are part of what everybody thinks about with the with any president. The judicial filibustering, we've seen even just threats of it. The Gang of 14 that agreed to moderate that. This is one of the most important areas of thinking about politics today because of, I suppose for various reasons, that a lot of the cultural war type issues end up getting mediated through the Supreme Court.
There were, before I came in, there was just a headline that all 9 Supreme Court justices seem to be thinking that Arizona's immigration law is constitutional. And they were almost taking the Obama administration to task for not really caring about illegal immigration, suggesting that, well, then the states are going to have to do something. So, yeah, ripped right from the headlines.
Yeah. So it's our judicial review disagreements about living constitution versus strict constructionism. All these kind of things are just really relevant today. So, but at the same time, the biggest issue that Hamilton had to deal with is no, we're not trying to take away trial by jury.
Right.
So
yeah.
You're sort of getting ready for the big issue about, and obviously people are asking their own questions.
Sure.
We're asking our questions.
Yeah, I was shocked when I read that had even become an issue.
Yeah.
That people were going to interpret the Constitution in that way, and he had to go to great lengths to explain that, and also that they weren't going to be taking away the state courts, which some people seem to interpret that could possibly happen.
Well, I found it interesting just that from the way they described the court in the first place as being this, group of judges who can serve basically the rest of their life as long as they still fit within the bounds of good behavior. But the way they kind of framed it as being, the judiciary is going to be the weakest branch of government. They're not really. It's almost like they're treating the judiciary as kind of like what you'd see in like a stereotypical like medieval movie where you find like those archivists in a moldy underground catacomb in a castle, going through scrolls with like kings coming down every once in a while asking them questions, and they give some sort of weird, like really introspective answer that it takes a long time to understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
But then, because this is 1787, 1789, and then in 1803, you have Marbury versus Madison, which changes really the whole nature of the court.
But what I found in reading this was that Hamilton had suggested Marbury versus Madison before it ever existed. He said it will be the role of the Supreme Court to judge acts of Congress constitutional or not.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I had just never heard anyone make that argument before Marbury versus Madison.
What I found interesting was that initially he starts off by talking about how the courts aren't going to be this super powerful ultimate branch of government, talking about how it's going to be the weakest of the 3 branches. But then, as they go on, he's also playing it up, trying to reassure peers that it's going to be too weak, that the judges are ineffective, that they're going to be controlled. No, they'll be beyond the control of the other powers, outside of the legislative and executive branches. I think, wasn't his exact wording,
in 78,
coin verses or the...
Well, yeah, he said that, on 78, he says the judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over either the sword or the purse.
Sword and purse opposite.
Yeah, and he basically kind of said that the court's not going to have force or will. which he was, suggesting it's going to be, a safe branch of the government, and that it's got to kind of keep an eye on those two that have those, those big powers.
So you wonder if almost Andrew Jackson kept a copy of this because he said it may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgment.
But you're the first person to ever accuse Andrew Jackson of reading. Certainly reading anything to do with the Constitution, because it simply was whatever he thought it was. Yeah, so, let's see here.
I also found it interesting in, I think it was 79, where it's talking about just whether judges should be elected or if they should be appointed and for how long. And just that, like, today it makes sense that you want, or I would think it would make sense to most people that you would want a judge, especially on the Supreme Court, to be someone who doesn't have to worry about constantly running for re-election and can just think about, the case at hand and not have to worry about appeasing one side or the other. But he really makes the good case for saying just that and kind of just, showing that that's the better argument.
Right. And that very similar argument he had about paying them, and whether or not, the Constitution guarantees their wages.
Yeah, and making the connection to how the president will be paid a fixed wage, but because it's 4 years, they say that, relative prices won't necessarily change, but if you have a lifetime appointment, somebody could be serving, 40, 50 years, and prices will change, so you can't say it's going to be fixed, because like it said in the one paper that it would, it could go from being this, you're making a nice chunk of money and you don't got to worry about anything to, going to, having to basically almost beg for food.
Right. Yeah, and he refers to that as a very powerful weapon of, having that power of paying people and, their livelihood being dependent, which could then in fact make, judges dependent, which he argued would not be a good thing. Now, there wasn't, this was, one of the shorter sessions, so.
There was
But what I wanted to, just was jotting down a couple of questions, especially as he was kind of wrapping it up. And this is one, you guys have had me in class, I always ask. Once these states ratified and became a part of this union, could they get out?
Right.
Well, I think that was, like, especially in 84 and 85, where they're just kind of wrapping things up, and especially when talking about, like, some of the states saying they want a Bill of Rights added, and Hamilton writing, no, we're too far along in the process, just let's finish this and then we'll go back to that. I think was trying, because he even says in here, we've kind of found this perfect moment to be able to have a kind of a national consensus to want this Constitution and to be able to push it through. So if we have to stop and go back 8 steps to rewriting the thing to include all these rights, then the moment's lost and we're basically screwed.
Yeah, he said something along the lines of, if imperfect man cannot create a perfect document.
Yeah.
And if we keep striving towards that perfection, everything will simply fall apart around us.
Yeah, I found it interesting how he referred to the Constitution as a Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And said that in a lot of these state constitutions, a lot of the things they wanted in the Bill of Rights were already protected.
Right.
It's interesting, though, his discussion on the freedom of the press and his arguments against needing a specific clause for that.
Yeah, yeah. If he were around today and was, saw the National Enquirer, I wonder if their take on freedom of the press would be any different.
I don't know, you might just get enamored with Bat Boy and want to keep reading.
Well, the National Enquirer is the one who broke the John Edwards.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah,
they have serve useful.
The Weekly World News.
Yeah.
Bad Boy.
And what I saw in that discussion was really the two sides. The Hamilton side, well, the government doesn't have the power to restrict the press, therefore, it won't do it or it can't do it.
Right.
Whereas the anti-federalists were, no, if it's not in writing that you can't do it, we don't trust.
Well, even going back to 82, where spent lengthy amounts of time talking about the whole trial by jury and basically the existence of state courts, that was again the anti-federalist view of, oh, well, it's not specifically saying it in here, so you must be getting rid of it. And Hamilton makes a very nice way of saying, you people are just kind of nuts.
Paranoid. Yeah,
He really does like to repeat that.
Mm-hmm.
He always just seems to be the angry Federalist paper writer. You overuse the caps locks constantly. I mean, the conclusion almost seemed to be sort of, you people who are still bringing up problems about this, and this, you're all idiots. Stop that.
He's probably just pissed that he and Madison had to do the majority of the writing. John Jacobs had to sit in the corner and sleep, and then when they needed something about treaties and international relations, they could kick him and wake him up.
Well, he was busy preparing himself to be the first Chief Justice, so. No, it just doesn't. It's funny how even today they kind of still have that argument about trusting government.
Right.
And I'm sure that we will see a commercial this summer that says, oh, Barack Obama wants more of your taxes for this. And we're going to see the government workers partying in Las Vegas, and, we can't trust them.
Right.
Mitt Romney for president.
Right. Well, I think this may be a result of the kind of pedigree in this historical sort of situation in which the United States was founded. Right? This massive mistrust. You just don't see that sort of attitude. I mean, I think there is unhappiness with the government, say in Canada and perhaps even in France or in Germany. But the actual pedigree, I think, makes for a very interesting situation, which has seemed to perpetuate itself. I find Americans overly suspicious of government. There's some conspiracy, that the government is trying to push people down or eliminate freedoms, and I don't know if there's any reason to believe that. I mean, I think that there are sort of historical instances of abuse, but I don't know that, there's abuse generally speaking.
And it was one of the major, it seems like you're talking about pedigree, one of the characteristics of small R Republican thought before the revolution was up. You need a vigilant populace to watch the government because there's going to be, the government's conspiring to take away freedom. So, and any action by the British always confirmed that. And there was in the British history, there's the court versus country kind of thing where the court was at the center trying to take away freedom. It was the country that had to watch it, and sort of those different traditions of basically kind of conspiracy theory type thing. Ranging from sometimes conspiracy was true to way outlandish stuff. Everywhere in between.
That was really what we were founded on to some degree. It was a distrust of government, and it's never really ever gone away. It's still there. But yet government has gotten increasingly bigger and increasingly more intrusive, and yet, so far you really can't find any examples of any egregious rights that it's taken away from us.
Would you say maybe, I wonder if the golden age of sort of trust in government in the United States was something like from Roosevelt to Nixon, right? From basically New Deal to Vietnam and Watergate.
Yeah.
Because it seems like then that was a period of probably the biggest expansion of government, and basically you had competent presidents and a sense that government was helping us get through the Depression, the War, the Cold War.
I think if you
and maybe actually very different notions of freedom actually at work here. I think for Americans, I think the typical vision of freedom is freedom from. Where if you have a European-style government, it's freedom to or freedom for, right? And there's this emphasis, freeing me up, so that, there's just more, I think, sort of a more widely spread global concern for the well-being of a greater body of individuals. Maybe that's not true, and maybe that's unfair, but...
Well, I don't know about that, because I think that a lot of times the way we get ourselves in trouble is we're trying to spread this freedom, you know, and that's where we've kind of, sometimes we overstep our bounds.
I think that's part of where the distrust in government comes from, because we have this fluid system that can be changed and have shifts and be expanded from time to time. You have those people that see themselves kind of as, you know, the forefront of the next big push to change something, and when they get spurned and told, no, you're going too far, and the government kind of pushes back on them, then they kind of, in their defeat, kind of feel that the government is oppressing them.
So you kind of get like the idea of, like, at least domestically speaking, like what domestic actions the government should take. There's that kind of difference. I think American culture is more skeptical of like say national health care. Almost every other industrialized country has that, which is good or bad depending on your perspective. But it's not really even a debate. Like there's not. I doubt there's too many people in Canada or Western Europe saying, you know, let's scrap this, right? I mean, so I'm sure there are some people who would, but that would be pretty rare. Whereas we have a large number of people, somewhere near half or maybe more than half, that were upset about a more modest version of that in the Obama reforms, right? So it's really an interesting kind of political culture difference, which I think goes back to that.
Well, I mean, go back just a quick second to what you said about trusting government. In teaching political science, the government had the greatest amount, the people had the greatest amount of confidence in the government post-New Deal, World War II, and then, of course, Nixon lied to us, Vietnam was a lie, so people's trust in government went down, and then Ronald Reagan is elected in this conservative revolution in which he stood up there and says, hey, you know, you people have been thinking for 50 years government's the solution. It is the problem.
Right.
So that's, a lot of political scientists look at that moment as a turn in American history of the President of the United States standing up and saying, hey, the government that I'm in charge of can't fix your problems.
Right. Yeah,
so when you have the number one guy saying, hey.
Right, yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Because it was almost like, instead of restoring trust in government, he was confirming the mistrust.
Distrust in government, and inability of government. And just one other thing, when you talk about how Americans talk about their freedom and their liberty, remember America was founded on the concept that your freedom and your liberty comes from God. You know, they are endowed by their creator, whereas Europeans and most other people believe that your freedoms come from your government. The government decides what freedoms and what liberties you have. And Americans believe, no, that just by being born, God has given you these freedoms. And that's why I think Americans are so protective of these individual rights, that they believe that God gave us.
To some degree, although I think that, Zach, I know you're going to say something. It's over to you. But I think that was kind of the European idea of that rights came from the government. But at the same time, the modern European governments were created kind of in opposition to that. So there's sort of a natural rights philosophy too. But it's not, the rights in European countries aren't nearly as connected with sort of a religious, there's not the meshing of Enlightenment freedom with Christianity that occurs in the United States. That kind of unique fusion, I think, gives it something to say.
I was just going to what you were saying about Reagan, I always thought it was kind of ironic that the person who is basically the face of the government and, you know, the one who is most recognizable as part of it is the one that's saying, and going to end up shouldering most of the blame for everything, is the one saying, yeah, government's the problem, you know, stop looking to it to fix things, when basically he knows that everything's going to get thrown back on him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I think that also that a lot of the resistance to big government comes from Americans were the individualists. You know, the rugged individual, the person that went out and conquered the frontier and took care of themselves. Whereas Europeans and others were a lot more communal. But because we had this big, huge, expansive continent, suddenly you found yourself and your family in the middle of nowhere, and you learned to rely on yourself.
Well, I've actually read some articles where people say that sense of American rugged individualism is why we don't have nationalized health care is because it goes back to that, and if you got hurt, you had to, deal with it yourself, and then maybe you could get a doctor to come visit you if you broke a bone and needed it set or whatever, but you found a way to get by.
Yeah, when Hoover was trying to defend not doing anything during the start of the Great Depression, he said, we're going to emasculate people in letting them think that they can't take care of themselves. So he was very worried about that. He said a lot of what made America great was this idea of the rugged individual who took care of himself. What he failed to realize was that, we had a lot more urban people now who, it's one thing if the economy goes bad and you're a self-sufficient farmer, it's like no big deal. But when the economy goes bad and 25% of the people are unemployed, that's millions and millions of people. So there is kind of that balance of, you still have those people out on the family farm who can take care of themselves, but yet the people living in urban environments, it's not like they can go slaughter a hog or something. So Americans, I think, have always been very protective of that individualism. And Hoover said, once the government starts giving you things, then the government has power over you.
Well, on the bright side, at least the Federalist Papers said nothing about being the vanguard of the worldwide revolution. Then we'd be really in trouble.
Well, it kind of did at one point where we're going to be a model for the whole world, but yes, it was very different from Lenin's. Yeah, very different from Lenin as well.
Yes. The word vanguard is very important.
What would be the equivalent of the common term? The Republican term or something where we're going to spread Republican?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I found really interesting, and I thought this was a great quote to wrap the Federalist Papers up, was when they use a Hume's quote about, creating the perfect government, and that where it says, the judgments of many must unite in the work, experience must guide the labor, time must bring it to perfection, and the feeling of inconveniences must correct the mistakes which they inevitably fall into in their first trials and experiments. Basically saying, what we've done isn't perfect, but it's, our best shot at getting closer towards it. So let's go with it and see where it leads and kind of keep pushing. And I think, and then later on, towards the end of it, it says, a nation without a national government is an awful spectacle. And I found that, and to just come out and, for as wordy and eloquent as some of these papers have been, to come out and just say that in plain language right at the end, I found kind of refreshing, because it's kind of the last little, okay, we've given you all our arguments, we need that one quick little one-liner just to wrap it up. Boom, here it is.
It is actually funny towards the end, Hamilton pointing out that we were going to talk about these two things, but I've already covered that several times.
Yeah. Now, he could get a little irritated with those who couldn't quite follow along with him.
Or people who seem to object to no titles of nobility for anyone in America. You'd think that would have been rather popular.
It's going to be the Duke of Bourbonnais.
It would be more like a Count of Bourbonnais. I mean, maybe...
The Baron of Bourbonnais?
Maybe.
Marquis.
Scott and I were talking this morning.
Springfield.
We were talking this morning as we were wrapping this up about what a great asset this was, and it was a great idea for Scott to come up with this. So, and I thought how different it is today, because I was telling Scott, I said, where are the great political minds today? Where are they? And Scott said, well, they're college professors. Where here, the great political minds of the day are also the leaders. I mean, what was the last great political idea that came out since the Constitution? Communism failed, fascism failed, Nazism failed. And I just thought, it just reminds me of, they weren't perfect, but they got it pretty darn close.
And I know since we've been doing these, since I'm taking American government right now, especially these last few sections where we've been dealing with the individual branches of government, that's somehow magically fallen right in line with covering them in American government. So reading these and kind of seeing, kind of how they envision the spirit of those bodies to work, and then reading, how they work now, it's really helped my understanding and form some ideas of government.
And that may be due to a kind of anti-intellectual sort of spirit that is, I think, permeated the United States. Our politicians typically are not intellectuals.
No. They're the guys who win the elections.
Yes, they're the guys who win the elections. They're, in some cases, celebrities.
Have the most money.
Have the most money. And that's, I think, unfortunate. I think, if you think about who's on our coins, I think rightly so, we have great politicians on our coins, but I think, why not put William James on the back of a quarter, or Charles Peirce, or some of the great American intellectuals who were distinctively American in their approach to philosophical problems and political issues. I think it is an unfortunate mix where you have this less respect for the intellectual community.
And I read somewhere, someone told me once that in 1964, prior to the 1964 election, John F. Kennedy, the likely Democratic nominee, got together with Barry Goldwater, the likely Republican nominee, and they basically agreed, let's have an intellectual debate about the direction of the country. Whereas Goldwater was going to argue that we need to get rid of this welfare state, we need to reduce the size of government, we need to go back to 19th century type government where there wasn't this large intrusive federal government, and they both agreed to do that. Now it's just there is no intellectual debate whatsoever in politics. Right. It's 30-second sound bites.
Well, of course, Obama is a professor.
Right, that's true.
When was the last time a professor was elected as president?
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, so it's been a really long time.
And a history one at that.
Yeah, that's right. Was there anybody in between? I don't know. Right, so.
Yeah, I think old Wilson.
Right, and the kind of the populism of right or left in the United States tends to probably undermine some of the respect for somebody with credentials. So with intellectual credentials. So that's used against Obama sometimes in a different way that Romney's wealth is used. So Romney is targeted by left populism for his wealth. Obama by right populism for his going to the Ivy League schools.
Well, like before Santorum dropped out, he had that one rally or whatever where he said, President Obama wants everybody to be able to go to college and get an education. What a snob. It's like, how is getting an education snobbery?
Although I imagine that Santorum's position on that issue is pretty isolated. Sure. I can't imagine most Republicans would support it.
My God, they teach evolution in them schools.
Well, considering some of the other things he said, like when he said that President, I think it was Meet the Press, when he said that President Kennedy's remarks about separation of church and state made me made him want to throw up. It's like, okay, if that's your opinion, fine, all well and good, But that's one of those opinions where you should be really careful about who you say
Especially
to.
since Kennedy's popularity is through the roof.
And since Kennedy is basically like the second or third most popular president ever, it's like
which probably has more to do with his assassination than his actual presidency. But
There's no doubt that that certainly helped him in the public's image. This youthful, vibrant, president kept around in the prime of his life.
One of the things I think that's kind of caused the shift from having intellectuals being government to being people with money or power in business or whatever is kind of like how they always said in here, the people who are going to be elected to the offices were going to be the best of people, the ones that felt the calling, that it was their kind of duty to serve, and they would be honored to go and do that, and serving that office would be its own reward. And then, after the first, 5 or so presidents, you start to, government starts to devolve into politicking, and it kind of brings up the start of, let's have popularity contests for elections, and even now with debates, you have them be nothing on, like, all the debates that the Republicans had during the primaries. None of them really dealt with issues at all. It was whatever story about whatever candidate was in the news was popular that day, and they'd spend hours talking about it.
Do you think partly I think partly the specialization of the society just over time too, so that people who are intellectuals are usually, not always, but usually college professors focused on something narrow, you know. There are a few people who can really kind of bridge the, you know, we call them public intellectuals, but, and oftentimes I don't know that the people who are, I don't know that professors say, if that's a representation of many intellectuals, they don't view their responsibilities very public, right? It's a narrow kind of thing. And then at the same time, say you're studying political theory like these guys had, to really study political theory today, you've got to be very devoted to it. You've got to publish and all that kind of stuff. These guys had read the Enlightenment materials. They'd read Plutarch and the classics, and I think really the bar to be a intellectual was a lot less professionalized, you know. So that kind of segmenting of our society probably prevents some people like this from really getting involved. Plus the more democratization and stuff too.
Well, and the flight of the polymath, right, is really what we're talking about. You know, like, I mean, I think of the great intellectuals of the Enlightenment movement, people like Leibniz. I mean, they were mathematicians, philosophers. I mean, they were everything.
They were jacks of all trades, masters of none.
Well, that's just the opposite. I mean, they really were masters at many different fields. I mean, you know, Leibniz developed calculus alongside of Newton.
In many ways,
one of the greatest philosophers who's ever lived. I mean, you know, and you just don't see that anymore. He was active politically as well. So.
I think some of that can be attributed to how much knowledge has increased over the past several centuries. Now, in order to truly master something, you need to devote yourself to it, specialize. Gone are days when you could become educated in law, theology, politics, mathematics, anything that took your fancy.
Right. Well, our education system has changed.
Yes.
The point of education was to be an enlightened person. Now it's becoming more and more job training. You know, an accountant doesn't want to sit through a class on Socrates or Plato or anything like that. They're more interested in learning how to become an accountant. Whereas now that I've read these, I mean, to me, should almost be required reading. Yes. There should be a college course everyone is required to take called the Federalist Papers. And you could maybe read the Anti-Federalist, or you should read the Anti-Federalist Papers along with it. Because you really get an idea or a sense of what the founders wanted. Now, we don't necessarily have to stay with that, but you at least get an understanding of where they're coming from.
Yeah, and there are other specific papers in here that I think should be part of the course material for various classes. Like you have 10 and 51, which deal with their views of people in general and human nature. That could be read in like sociology classes or psychology classes or ethics or something. And then you have, I think it was 54 that talked about the 3/5 rule for slavery. That could be talked about in sociology again, or American government or history classes, and it would really enlighten people to, you know, maybe give them a little bit better understanding of why things were the way they were, as opposed to just, because a lot of people nowadays, those people way back, you know, living 200 years ago, those people were, you know, barbaric cavemen and didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have the, you know, the glorious technology of the internet and Wikipedia and Google and all this other crap that can misconstrue people's knowledge. And
no, I think this is just a really good example of how you can have an intellectual debate over something. You know, I mean, ratifying this new Constitution was a very big step. And for people to have discussed it in the way that they did, it is just amazing to me. You know, Hamilton got a little snide once in a while, but, you know, they got the new Constitution passed without one Willie Wharton ad. You know? If Thomas Jefferson gets his way and the Constitution isn't ratified, this man will come rape your wife and daughter.
And part of it, too, I think, is that, like, you always hear politicians now, they go on TV, especially when people are running for office, it's and especially people for Congress, like, oh, well, the founding fathers said this, the framers of the Constitution said this, and they say things that are just so
Off the wall.
off the wall and so mind-numbingly, like, how could you think that that's what they thought back then? Like, I think it should be required that in order for you to run for public office at the national level like that, you should have to read these and, you know.
Well, the next time I'm with my golf buddy Lane, who says that the Second Amendment meant only a well-regulated militia could have guns. I'm going to say, well, you know, in Federalist number, you know, I think it was Hamilton said, no, the people need to have guns individually to keep their government in line. So now I'm better prepared to argue that with him because I'm more enlightened.
Yeah, I kind of wish I would have.
Well, there may be other grounds for rejecting that interpretation.
Although I believe it was George Washington. It was George Washington who said I'm not quoting this exactly, but guns are essential to liberty because they are the people's liberty's teeth.
Well, and Jefferson also came out and said that people need to have their guns should their government ever become tyrannical. Now, we can have an argument, do people in today's society need their guns? Well, that's an argument we can have, and we'd have to amend the Constitution.
Yeah, right. Well, not only that, you'd also
Well,
have to,
yeah.
That's what I was
like, to have that discussion, you'd also have to look at the changing nature of firearms as they've been developed.
Sure.
Because back then it was basically you had a non-repeating, you have to load it every time you want to fire a musket that you couldn't even call a rifle because it didn't have a rifle barrel, and it was something that was basically handed down father to son almost in some cases.
But I don't think they cared about the firepower as much as they just felt it was important because of their distrust of government, the government they were creating.
Well, yeah, but nowadays you have people running around quoting the Second Amendment as reasons for them to own, something that could put a hole the size of a grapefruit inside of a building.
Right.
And they say they need, the Second Amendment said, they roll the Second Amendment out like it's some sort of carte blanche for them to have whatever they have without them thinking, do I really need this? It's one of those things that for me goes back to this idea of moral and ethical, basically human inertia, where it's the I want comes way before the do I really need.
Could I own an F-16 under the Second Amendment?
To be
Well, the Supreme Court
Their
has,
arms.
well, the Supreme Court has said that reasonable restrictions can't be made. They stop. I ordered a nuclear weapon from Amazon. They wouldn't send it to me.
To be devil's advocate, if the government ever really did start stripping people's rights, you would need anti-tank weapons.
That's precisely my point, is that there's nothing that any individual family could do, or any sort of group of families even, to sort of rebel against their government. I mean, you'd have to have a very significant movement to make any ground.
Well, I'm not mistaken, though. I think during the Eisenhower administration, they made it illegal to try to overthrow the government. Yeah.
You no longer have the right to alter or abolish your government.
Right, exactly.
It was only the Declaration of Independence anyway.
Exactly.
No force of law.
Right, if I'm not mistaken, they did.
Yeah, I think that's right.
They did pass that.
Well, see,
Or to advocate
that's
for it.
just that extra thing in there, so that way, if you do try and uprise and overthrow the government and fail, then you can be prosecuted for it. It's like the same thing with impeachments, like it says in here, not only would they be removed from office and disavowed from ever being allowed to hold one again, they would also be criminally liable for whatever they did. So it's kind of a double kick in the pants.
Well, Scott, this was your great idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I thought I knew everything, and now I realize I do.
Yeah.
But only after having finished this.
That's right.
So, great idea.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for participating. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll see you.
Thank you for
joining
Somewhere
us.
down the road. Drink Diet Mountain Dew.